If we're comparing the Star Wars prequels to natural disasters, then Episode 1 is the earthquake, and Episode 2 is the tsunami. Hello everyone, my name is Ryan Cam, and welcome to my review for Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. This movie was directed once again by George Lucas, and it is the latest in my series where I review every Star Wars movie released in theaters leading up to The Rise of Skywalker coming out this December. And it's pretty safe to say we are officially in the crap now, folks. For the longest time, Episode 2 was the bane of every Star Wars fan's existence. Even the most ardent haters of Episode 1 could look at it and be, okay, there was at least some effort put forth. But most people think that Episode 2 is absolutely deplorable. And yes, I am absolutely one of those people. Don't get me wrong, I don't think that Attack of the Clones is the worst movie that I've ever seen. Far from it. But in terms of Star Wars and its grand scale, it's like with Attack of the Clones and one other movie, more on that a little later, one of these things is definitely not like the others. There's a lot of groan-worthy stuff in Episode 2, but surprisingly, there's some decent stuff in there as well. So, let's talk about it. So the movie basically starts out with Natalie Portman reprising her role as now Senator Amidala, who comes to Coruscant because she feels that she is being targeted for assassination. Who is the assassinator? Well, she believes that it is Count Dooku, a recently exiled Jedi who is now basically evil. But no one has really heard from him, no one knows really where he is. So it's really just, as Conrad Thompson would say, rumor and innuendo. And Samuel L. Jackson, playing Mace Windu, says the two most important lines in the movie in these next couple scenes. First, he tells Senator Amidala, Count Dooku is a former Jedi. It's not in his nature to try to assassinate people. And then he follows that up with, we are keepers of the peace, not soldiers. I'm going to talk about the really, really big irony with those two statements a little later on, but let's just keep going with the story. Then we see Obi-Wan Kenobi, played by Ewan McGregor once again, and his apprentice, Anakin Skywalker, played this time by Hayden Christensen. Okay, let's rip off the Hayden Christensen band-aid, shall we? I don't hate Hayden Christensen. I've seen him in interviews. He is a very nice guy. And he's even a great actor. If you've never seen the movie Shattered Glass, the guy does a great job. And I am so happy to know that he is basically retired to his farm in Canada and still acts from time to time. So I'm truly grateful that he has found peace. But he's not very good in this movie. I'll talk about a lot of the crappy dialogue that's in Attack of the Clones a little later on, but let's just say that in the case of Christensen, it takes two to tango, and I do not think even Daniel Day-Lewis could get across some of the stilted and awkward lines that he was given. Basically, Christensen was dealt a raw deal, and he deserves so much more. But after Kenobi and Skywalker foil an assassination plot, they chase after a bounty hunter who they later learn is a changeling. She can change her appearance to a human or an alien or maybe something in between. And the chase in this scene reminds me a lot of The Fifth Element. Don't get me wrong, I don't think that it was an outright ripoff of The Fifth Element, but I think that every car chase through a futuristic city will always and forever be compared to The Fifth Element. Just because the car chase in The Fifth Element was so much fun, and to see it done by literally anyone else would just be a ripoff. But at the end of the chase, when he and Skywalker are in the bar together, he says one of the most ironic lines in the history of cinema. Why do you feel like you're going to be the death of me? If you could only see Then they find the changeling in the bar, cut its hand off, they try to interrogate it, but by the time she says, it was a bounty hunter named... She gets a dart in her neck and she dies. Which leads us into the two main storylines that persist throughout 90% of this movie. Anakin goes off to protect Padme Amidala on her home planet of Naboo because she still feels threatened, and she is a pretty important person in the Galactic Senate, so yeah, we need to protect her. And Kenobi goes to the planet Kamino to investigate what's going on over there. I'm going to talk about the Padme and Anakin stuff first because more than likely, if you clicked on this video, you more than likely want to hear what I have to say about this. Okay, so you heard me talk about Hayden Christensen before. That hasn't changed. And I respect Natalie Portman. I think she's a great actress. She's won an Oscar for Black Swan. She's been cool in many other movies. I really like Natalie Portman. But both of these characters sucked. They sucked from the very beginning of this movie. And why do they suck? Well, because they go through one of the most forced and stilted romances in the history of cinema. I am not against romance in movies. There are some romance movies that are legitimately outstanding. However, the romance in this movie is just awful. And it's not just because of the crappy dialogue they have to say, but the relationship is just such a stop-start affair that it's just frustrating. Because Senator Amidala is wearing even more and more revealing clothing as this vacation goes on, and Anakin is looking even more and more thirsty by the day. Anakin is giving Padme the creepy eyes that even John Stamos would be like, tone it down. And yet, every time they get close to one another, Padme's like, stop, I'm a senator, you're a Jedi, this can't happen. It gets to the point where you just put your head in your hands and you're just like, come on, guys, either shit or get off the pot. That's pretty much all I have to say about the romance. It's terrible, it shouldn't be in there, but, you know, it is, so c'est la vie. And before we move on, we have to talk about, I hate sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere. Tommy Wiseau couldn't deliver it better. I'm going to go crazy unless we move on, so let's move on to the Kenobi storyline, which is infinitely more interesting. Kenobi takes the dart that killed the bounty hunter to a friend that he knows, which, quick side note on the diner, I really don't mind it. It never comes up in the movie again. Plus, it's world building, so it's nice to know that Kenobi has friends. And the diner owner tells him, oh yeah, these darts come from Kamino. They've got some cloning stuff going on there you might want to check out. And Kenobi's like, cloning? So then he goes back to the Jedi archives and searches for Kamino, but in the Jedi system, Kamino doesn't exist, as told by the librarian. If it is not in our records, it does not exist. More on that a little later. So then he finally goes to Yoda, and if anyone's going to give him a straight answer, it's going to be everybody's favorite Muppet. So he takes the dart to Yoda, and Yoda's like, yep, there's definitely something there. It is definitely something we have overlooked. And so Kenobi's like, that's all I need to hear. And next stop, Kamino. And let's talk about Kamino for 1 second, because Kamino looks like Florida during hurricane season every day. And just how miserable must that be? But then Kenobi arrives and he meets what I assume is either the king or the queen of Kamino. And they sit down and they talk about the clone army that the Kaminoans have built on the most awkward chairs I have ever seen. Seriously, guys, these chairs, they look like somebody cut a grapefruit in half, tied it to a piece of string, and suspended it in the air. It's a nitpick, yes, but every time I've seen this movie, it has driven me nuts. Like, how is Kenobi not slipping and sliding off of that thing? But after Kenobi's battle with IKEA furniture, he later learns that the clone army was built or ordered to be built by a Jedi Master named Sifo-Dyas. This is never mentioned in the prequels ever again, which drives me crazy even today. It drives me crazy because this sounds like an interesting idea. Like, a Jedi must have known, okay, we're clearly missing something. There's going to be a war, and I want to be prepared when that happens. So he orders the clone army. But it's never mentioned in the prequels ever again. Now, we later learn in the extended lore that Sifo-Dyas was a discredited Jedi who was called a warmonger, but it turns out he was kind of right. Until I looked it up, I thought that Qui-Gon Jinn was Sifo-Dyas and he had changed his name or something. Maybe he didn't want his name on the bill, I guess? It's one of the most confusing things about the Star Wars prequels. It's a question that's literally never answered and is never brought up again. You have to read a book or look it up on Wikipedia to figure it out. It's beyond frustrating. But Kenobi then soon meets Jango Fett, the man who is the basis for all these clones, and his son, who is even worse a child actor than Jake Lloyd. "Hello, Boba. Is your father here?" "Yup." "May we see him?" "Sure." The guy from Samurai Cop couldn't have done better. Kenobi meets Jango Fett, they exchange threats. Kenobi then reports back that, hey, we've got a bill for a clone army here. Do you all know about this? And Mace Windu and Yoda look at each other like, what are you talking about? We had no idea this thing existed. Remember this moment. It is important, I promise, along with the 2 sets of dialogue that I set aside. I'm going to put it on the back burner and bring it all forward at the end. Kenobi and Fett then have a battle on the planet. Then they chase each other through an asteroid field. Oh golly gee, I wonder what movie that could be referencing to. It could literally be anything. But this was a pretty good space battle regardless. I even love those sound bombs that go off where Jango releases like choo choo and it looks like a pill and it shoots out and then it flies past him and then it explodes and you don't hear anything and then it's just a loud noise. It's like bang. It's pretty good sound design in this movie. Kenobi then chases Jango to the planet Geonosis, which is basically a planet made up of every 16-year-old boy's face, gassy, hot, and just full of acid. And he discovers that a lot of important people are meeting to do a bit of a hostile takeover. A new world order, if you will. And all of them are led by Count Dooku, played by Christopher Lee. This was a great casting choice, by the way. But Kenobi is eventually captured, and he is eventually interrogated by Count Dooku. Or, well, not exactly interrogated, more like told exactly what's going to happen. And Lee was right about this, by the way. Dooku basically says, we have our people on the inside, we have already compromised the Chancellor, it's only a matter of time before we take over. And Kenobi's like, no, that can't happen. More on that later. Let's go back to Anakin and Padme for a couple minutes. Anakin starts getting these nightmares. Well, the nightmares have been persisting for a while now, but he fears for his mother's life. So he and Padme go back to his home at Tatooine, and they meet Watto again, who is far skinnier than we last saw him. But then he's like, I sold your mom. I sold them to the Lars family. So then they go and meet the Lars family. Owen Lars, by the way, is played by before he was famous, Joel Edgerton. They later learned that Shmi basically got married, but was then kidnapped by the Sand People. And so Anakin was like, I'm going to find her. And this was one of the best parts of the movie, where Anakin is going from place to place trying to figure out where the Sand People are. It's just John Williams' score kicking on, some very beautiful cinematography, and then there's this scene where Anakin's on his speeder and it's against the dual sunset. If it's a callback to A New Hope, then it's a beautiful callback. I could be making something out of nothing, but at the end of the day, it's just a beautiful scene regardless. He soon finds the Sand People and later learns that his mom has died. This does not sit well with him. Anakin then basically just opens a nice ice-cold can of whoop-ass on this Sand People tribe and just kills every one of them. He then buries his mom, and we partake in more awful dialogue. They were animals! And I slaughtered them like animals! Insert bad actor name here, could not have done it better. After that nonsense, Anakin and Padme learn that Obi-Wan has been kidnapped. They go to Geonosis. They fight off Florida mosquitoes. They're Geonosians, but come on, they're basically mosquitoes in Florida. If you live in Florida, you will absolutely agree with me on this. Anakin and Padme fight them on a conveyor belt. Oh golly gee, where have I seen that before? It was a movie that literally came out the same year. Eventually, all three are captured. Padme delivers the worst line of dialogue in the movie, and all three of them are led out to a coliseum to be eaten by Thundercats villains. But then at the last minute, they are saved by Mace Windu, who delivers the coolest line in the entire movie, when he pops his saber right in front of Jango Fett's throat and says, "This party's over." And pretty much every single Jedi that is known to man is in this stadium. They all pop their lightsabers and are like, alright, you want some, come get some. And then the battle commences. Remember those two lines of dialogue where Mace Windu basically said, "We're keepers of the peace, not soldiers, and it's not in Dooku's nature to perform assassinations and do these deadly things." And do you remember the scene where Mace Windu and Yoda were like, "We had no idea a clone army was being built. Why do you ask?" This all bleeds into the narrative throughout the prequels of the arrogance of the Jedi. That they had gotten so big and so high in their ivory tower that they failed to notice that a Sith rebellion had been building itself from the ground up. And they were so busy, meditating, that they either A, forgot to notice, or B, failed to notice. Either way, it's not a good look. And by reacting the way that they did, with literally every Jedi coming to save these three, it pretty much assassinates the whole "we are the keepers of the peace, not soldiers" narrative. It assassinates the whole Count Dooku wouldn't kill anyone narrative. And it assassinates the whole "we had no idea a Clone War existed" narrative, because literally as soon as they show up, you're like, "Alright guys, I'm your general, follow me." What am I getting at with this? Well, basically, this is why I think the prequels are misunderstood. They are not perfect. They are misunderstood. There's a subtle through line of how one person can be so perfect and so arrogant that they forget to mention their competition. That forever knowing that competition does exist. There can't be an all good and there cannot be an all evil. At the end of the day, there will always be a good and there will always be an evil, whether you like it or not. And whether the Jedi like it or not, the evil has shown up, and they're ready for a fight. And fight they do in, by far, the coolest battle of the prequels. Or at least one of them. Basically, we see all types of droids. We see the crab droid, the spider droid. We see clones go in. And yeah, the CGI looks kind of dated, but considering some of the CGI we've seen in 2019 and some of the CGI we've seen in Attack of the Clones, it's pretty damn good. But let's wrap this up by talking about the final battle. Obi-Wan and Anakin chase Count Dooku to this little spaceport, and they have a duel. And let's just say this lightsaber duel pales in comparison to the Duel of the Fates in The Phantom Menace. Basically, it's Christopher Lee's stunt double, looking very obvious, by the way, and Anakin's stunt double basically waving their lightsabers in the air in a dark hallway, and it just doesn't look good. Now, I know that in the Duel of the Fates, Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and Darth Maul were basically fighting alongside a massively lighted power generator. but you could at least see, or somewhat see, what was going on. When in this duel, it was just... But at the end of the day, Anakin gets his arm cut off, Obi-Wan gets stabbed in the leg and he gets shooted off, and then Yoda comes in and he kicks ass. There are people that like this scene and people that despise this scene. Personally, I kind of like it. There are some people who are like, if Yoda's so powerful, why does he need a lightsaber? If he's so powerful, why does he need a cane? Well, I'm of the belief that Yoda needs the Force when he needs it. At the end of the day, he's still a frail old man, but he knows that if he uses the Force, he's basically 80 years younger, so he uses it sparingly. But when he does use it, it's one shot, one kill. But Dooku eventually gets away, and in a pretty cool scene, he meets up with Emperor Palpatine, and he tells him, "I have good news for you, my lord. War has begun." And Palpatine's like, "Good. Very good." And in a scene, we later see the plans for the Death Star. I had no way to segue to that, I just thought that was pretty cool. But then we see Anakin and Padme get married, and not since Dakota Johnson and Jamie Dornan in the 50 Shades movies has there been a more awkward romance. Despite the fact that I have a lot of problems with this movie, at the end of the day, I am going to give it a good rating. I think that there is a lot of positives to this movie, however, there's a lot of negatives that you just can't ignore. I think out of all the prequels, it's definitely the most thematic in the Arrogance of the Jedi stuff, and there were some pretty cool moments with the Jedi and some pretty cool looking isolated scenes. The sound design was great, the music was great, but it's John Williams, of course the music is going to be great. But unfortunately, this movie was watered down by incredibly stilted dialogue and a romance that really just didn't work. Attack of the Clones is not my least favorite Star Wars movie, but it is very close. But that's all for me, guys. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Ryan Cam, and I'll see you in the next one.